The first sign that something was wrong was not the alarms. It was the sky. Not dramatically wrong. Not the kind of wrong that makes people stop in the street and point upward. It was quieter than that. Subtle. The kind of wrong you only notice if you've seen the same sky enough times to understand how it's supposed to feel. It was a shade too pale. Earth's sky had always carried depth, layers of blue that shifted with the hour, with the weather, with the angle of light. But that morning, standing on the observation platform above Pacific Orbital Ring 3, I watched the horizon bleed into a washed-out gradient that looked tired. Like something was thinning. Like something was running out. No one said anything. Traffic moved below in clean, controlled lanes. Cargo shuttles rose and fell in steady intervals. The city lights dimmed on schedule as the sun climbed higher. Everything was functioning exactly the way it was designed to function. Which was the problem? Because systems continue functioning long after the people inside them have started to understand that something is wrong. My name is Elias Varn. I am 38 years old. I have served as a tactical systems analyst for the Terran Defense Network for 11 years, and for the last 4, I have been assigned to long-range threat modeling, the kind of work that involves watching patterns no one else wants to look at for longer than is comfortable. I noticed the sky at 6:12. At 6:14, my terminal flagged the first anomaly. It wasn't labeled as one. The system never labels things that way. It presents data, clean and neutral, and leaves the interpretation to people who are paid to see what isn't being said. Deep array signal drift. That was the official phrasing. A minor deviation in background noise patterns detected beyond the outer monitoring boundary. Within acceptable variance. Logged for review. No action required. I read it twice. Then a third time. Because there is a particular kind of language used in reports like this. A careful language. A language designed not to alarm, not to escalate, not to assign meaning too quickly. But underneath that language, if you spend enough years inside it, you learn to hear something else. Not what the report says. What it avoids saying. I opened the raw data feed. The drift wasn't random. It had structure. That was the first thing that settled into me, slow and heavy. The signals were faint, buried under layers of cosmic background interference, but they repeated. Not perfectly. Not in a way that a basic system would flag as intentional. But close enough. Close enough that if you were looking for it, if you had spent enough time studying patterns that didn't want to be recognized, you could see the edges of something deliberate. Something organized. I leaned back in the chair and looked out at the sky again. Still that pale, tired blue. Still wrong. I thought about ignoring it. That's the part people don't talk about. They think moments like this are decisive. That you see something strange and immediately act. That instinct takes over and everything becomes clear. It doesn't. There's always a moment, a small one, sometimes only seconds, where you consider the easier option. Close the report. Mark it for later. Let someone else pick it up. Because if you're wrong, you've just escalated nothing into something. And if you're right, everything changes. I didn't close it. Instead, I cross-referenced the signal drift with archived threat models. The system took 3.2 seconds to return results. There were no matches. Not partial. Not approximate. Nothing. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Because unknown patterns are not comforting when your job is built on the assumption that everything dangerous has already been studied, categorized, and understood. I adjusted the filter parameters. Narrowed the frequency band. Stripped away background noise layers one by one until the signal, whatever it was, sat exposed against the dark. It looked smaller that way. Cleaner. Almost harmless. Until you noticed the spacing. The intervals between pulses. Precise. Not machine perfect. But intentional. Like something that understood imperfection well enough to imitate it. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that doesn't come from memory exactly, but from something adjacent to it. A shape your mind has encountered before, even if the details are different. I had seen this kind of pattern once. A long time ago. I was 8 years old, standing in my mother's living room while the news feed cycled through footage that didn't make sense to me yet. Ships in orbit that didn't belong to us. Light moving in ways light wasn't supposed to move. Voices speaking in tones that weren't human, translated into words that were. She had stood behind me with one hand on my shoulder, steady and firm. They came before we knew how to ask, she had said quietly. I didn't understand it then. I understood it now. I looked back at the data. At the repeating structure buried inside what the system insisted was noise. At the pattern that didn't match anything in our database. At the sky that was just slightly the wrong color. And I realized something that made everything else fall into place with a kind of terrible clarity. This wasn't random. It wasn't natural. And it wasn't new. It was familiar. Not to us. But to something that had already decided what we were. I opened a priority channel. My hands were steady when I did it. That surprised me more than anything else. There are moments when your body understands the weight of something before your mind does. Moments when instinct steps in quietly and takes over the parts of you that would otherwise hesitate. This was one of them. The message field blinked, waiting. Protocol required a header. Identification. Clearance codes. Structured formatting designed to make sure information moved cleanly through the system without ambiguity. I didn't start with any of that. I typed one word. Listen. And for a moment, before I sent it, I looked out at the sky one more time. Still pale. Still thinning. Still pretending to be what it had always been. Just slightly off. Like a lie that hadn't been fully spoken yet. Then I hit send. The official response to my message came back in 6 minutes. Which meant it had been escalated immediately. That alone told me everything I needed to know. By the time I was called down to level 9, the room was already full. Not crowded, rooms like this never are, but occupied in a way that makes space feel smaller than it is. People stood in quiet clusters around the central table, screens lit with data feeds I recognized and some I didn't. No one was speaking above a low murmur. That particular tone. Controlled. Measured. The sound of people who understand something is wrong and have not yet agreed on how wrong. Director Halden was the first to look up when I entered. He didn't greet me. He didn't need to. Show us, he said. So I did. I walked them through the signal drift. The pattern recognition. The absence of matches in our database. I kept my voice level, my explanations precise. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't speculate. I didn't need to. Because halfway through the presentation, the room had already gone quiet. Not attentive quiet. Heavy quiet. The kind that settles when everyone arrives at the same conclusion at the same time and no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. It was Dr. Lien who finally did. She had spent 32 years studying non-human communication systems, most of that time working alongside the Veil during the final years after the war. If there was anyone in the room who understood what patterns like this could mean, it was her. She leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the waveform. I've seen this before, she said. No one interrupted her. No one asked where. Because we all knew. She said it anyway. The Veil early warning arrays picked up something similar before first contact with the Keth. There it was. Spoken. Placed in the room like a weight. No one reacted immediately. Not visibly. But I watched the shift happen, the subtle recalibration behind their eyes as the past moved forward and aligned itself with the present. Director Halden exhaled slowly. That was 21 years ago. Yes, Dr. Lien said. It was. 21 years. Long enough for most systems to reset. Long enough for people to believe that whatever had happened back then had ended. It hadn't. We had just been given time. I felt that thought settle into me with uncomfortable precision. Time we hadn't earned. Time someone else had paid for. Run the comparison, Halden said. I had already done it. I brought up the archived data from the Veil arrays, what little of it had been shared with us after the war. The patterns weren't identical. They weren't supposed to be. Too much time had passed. Too many variables had changed. But the structure was the same. Not exact. But close enough that anyone in that room could see it. Close enough that no one tried to argue. The silence stretched. Then someone, one of the junior analysts, voice tighter than he probably intended, asked the question that had been sitting there from the moment Dr. Lien spoke. If this matches, then why didn't we detect it earlier? Dr. Lien didn't look away from the screen. Because last time, she said quietly, it wasn't aimed at us. That landed harder than anything else. Because it reframed everything. The first time the signal had appeared, humanity hadn't been the target. We had been adjacent. Unprepared. Unaware. And alive only because someone else had stepped into the path. The Veil. I had read the reports. Everyone had. But reports are clean. They organize chaos into something structured, something digestible. They remove the parts that don't translate well into data, the hesitation, the cost, the human weight of decisions made too quickly under pressure. What remained was the outline. The Veil had detected the Keth expansion before anyone else. They had modeled the trajectory. They had understood, with a clarity we didn't yet possess, what would happen if that trajectory reached Sol. And they had made a decision. Not after negotiation. Not after consultation. Immediately. They moved their fleet. They intercepted. They stood between. At the time, the Veil population had been approximately 920 million. Post-war estimates placed them at just under 500 million. The official number settled later. 412 million. I had memorized it years ago. Not because I needed to. Because it stayed. Numbers like that don't pass through you cleanly. They leave a shape. They didn't ask us, the junior analyst said, almost to himself. No, I said. He looked at me. I held his gaze. They didn't. There was something important in that. Something that never quite sits right when you think about it too long. The veil hadn't intervened because we requested aid. We hadn't even known we needed it. They had seen the outcome, calculated the cost, and chosen to pay it anyway. For a species they had never met, on a world they had never visited. I thought about that as the room continued moving around me, orders being issued, data being rechecked, systems waking up that hadn't been touched in years. I thought about the scale of that decision. Not strategic. Not political. Something else. Something harder to categorize. Dr. Lien broke the silence again. If this is the same signal class, she said, then this is not reconnaissance. Halden looked at her. Then what is it? She hesitated. Not because she didn't know. Because she did. And saying it would make it real. It's alignment, she said. Pre-assembly coordination. I felt that word land. Assembly. Not a probe, not a test. Something larger. Something deliberate. Halden nodded once, slowly. How long? Dr. Lien didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the data set, ran a projection curve, overlaid it with archived veil models. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Based on signal density and expansion rate, 6 to 8 months before full formation. 6 to 8 months. The room absorbed that. Somewhere behind me, someone exhaled sharply. 6 months is a strange amount of time. Too long to panic immediately. Too short to solve anything comfortably. Just enough to understand exactly what's coming. And exactly how little room you have to change it. I looked back at the screen. At the pattern repeating itself quietly, patiently, far beyond the edges of anything we could reach. I thought about the veil. About a homeworld I had never seen. About a sky I had only studied through reports and second-hand descriptions. About a species that had once stood in the path of something like this and come out the other side, diminished. Changed. Still paying for it. They're still recovering, someone said. It wasn't a question. No, Dr. Lien replied. They're not. Another silence. Then Halden turned to me. You flagged this first. I nodded. He studied me for a moment. Not assessing my data. Assessing something else. You understand what this implies. It wasn't phrased as a question. No, I said. Then, after a second. I understand what it repeats. That seemed to satisfy him. He looked back at the room. At this stage, this information does not leave level 9. We verify. We confirm. We do not speculate beyond this room until we have certainty. He paused. Then added, quieter. And we hope we're wrong. No one said anything. Because hope, in a room like that, isn't a strategy. It's a placeholder. I looked at the signal one more time. At the pattern. At the familiar shape of something that had already happened once before. Only this time. This time, it was pointed directly at us. And somewhere, light years away, something was assembling again. They didn't announce it publicly. Not at first. For 8 days, the signal remained classified at level 9 while every system we had strained to prove it wrong. That's the part people outside command structures don't understand. We don't rush to conclusions. We delay them. We test them from every angle, run them through every model, challenge every assumption, not because we're cautious, but because once something like this is confirmed, there is no version of reality where it becomes smaller again. Only larger. Only closer. By day 3, the deep array had picked up 6 additional signal clusters. By day 5, those clusters had begun to synchronize. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But in a way that suggested coordination across distances that made the scale of it difficult to comprehend. By day 8, we stopped calling it drift. And started calling it what it was. Formation. The meeting that followed was smaller than the first. Fewer people. Higher clearance. No analysts. No observers. Just decision makers. I stood at the far end of the room again, but this time I wasn't presenting raw data. I was presenting conclusions. The screen behind me showed a 3-dimensional projection of deep space, empty at first glance, a dark field scattered with faint signal points that pulsed softly in irregular intervals. Until the overlay activated. Then the pattern revealed itself. Lines appeared. Connections. Vectors. What had looked like scattered noise resolved into structure. A shape beginning to form. Not static. Moving. Converging. It's not a fleet, Admiral Rice said quietly from the center table. No, I replied. Because calling it a fleet implied something familiar. This wasn't. It's a system. That was the closest word we had. A distributed structure assembling itself piece by piece across vast distances, each component aligning with the others through signals we were only just beginning to understand. Dr. Lien stood beside me this time. She didn't need a screen. She had already memorized it. They're building it in motion, she said. Each unit calibrates relative to the others as they move. By the time they reach final approach, the structure will already be operational. How many units? Someone asked. I adjusted the projection. The numbers appeared. Estimated. Conservative. 600 minimum. The room didn't react immediately. There's a threshold where numbers stop feeling real. 600 war-capable vessels, each integrated into a coordinated structure we didn't fully understand, was past that threshold. It wasn't just a force. It was intent. Admiral Rice leaned back slightly, eyes still on the display. And target? That was the question everything else revolved around. For 8 days, we had run projections. Trajectory models. Historical comparisons. Probability trees layered over probability trees until the system itself began flagging diminishing returns. There were multiple possible paths. Multiple potential targets. But one stood out. Not because it was the closest. Because it made the most sense. I brought up the final overlay. A clean arc cutting through the projection. Elegant. Direct. Unmistakable. The line ended at a point marked in quiet blue. Sol? No one spoke. Not immediately. Because there are moments when language becomes unnecessary. When the information presented is so clear, so complete, that saying it out loud doesn't add anything. It only confirms what everyone already understands. They've adjusted, Dr. Lien said softly. Admiral Rice glanced at her. From the previous trajectory. She nodded. The original Keth expansion pattern, based on Veil records, would have passed near Sol, not through it. This, she gestured lightly to the projection, is deliberate. Deliberate. That word mattered. It meant we weren't incidental. We weren't collateral. We were chosen. Why? One of the civilian advisors asked. It wasn't a challenge. It was the only question left. I answered before anyone else could. Because we interfered. The room shifted slightly. Not physically. Conceptually. I pulled up the engagement logs from the First War. Most of it was Veil data, translated and archived. Fragmented in places. Incomplete. But enough remained. They came once, I said. The Veil stopped them. Not completely, but enough to force a recalculation. I highlighted a section of the archive. A delay. Dr. Lien nodded. A disruption of projected outcome. I let that sit for a second. Then, they don't leave disruptions unresolved. That was the pattern. Not revenge. Not anger. Correction. The Keth didn't respond emotionally. They responded mathematically. If something interfered with an expected outcome, they adjusted until the outcome was restored. The Veil had interrupted their expansion. Earth had been the variable introduced into that interruption. Now they were removing the variable. Admiral Rice's voice was steady. Timeframe. I switched the display. The projection tightened. The outer clusters moved along their vectors, converging slowly but unmistakably. At current acceleration and synchronization rates, I paused, not for effect, but because precision mattered here. 6 months and 2 weeks until full formation enters inner system range. There it was. Placed cleanly in the center of the room. 6 months. Not theoretical. Not flexible. A fixed point in time moving toward us whether we acted or not. Someone at the table let out a slow breath. Can we confirm that? Dr. Lien answered. With margin of error, yes. Plus or minus 9 days. 9 days. In another context, that might have sounded like a buffer. Here, it wasn't. It was a rounding error. Admiral Rice folded his hands on the table. Public disclosure? That question carried weight. Not technical. Political. Strategic. Human. Silence followed. Because once you tell 8 billion people that something is coming for them, something that has already erased civilizations, you don't control what happens next. You manage it. Or you try to. Halden spoke from the far side. Not yet. Rice looked at him. Reasoning? Because panic is faster than preparation, Halden said. And right now, preparation is all we have. No one argued. Because it was true. But truth doesn't make decisions easier. It just makes them necessary. I looked back at the projection. At the slow, inevitable movement of something assembling itself across the dark. 600 units. One system. One purpose. And no indication, none, that it could be stopped using anything we currently understood. They know we're here, I said. The room turned toward me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. They adjusted their trajectory toward Sol. That means they've accounted for us. Maybe not completely. Maybe not accurately. But we're in their model now. Dr. Lien added quietly. And anything in their model is something they intend to resolve. Resolve. Not fight. Not negotiate. Eliminate uncertainty. I felt that settle into me with a clarity that cut through everything else. This wasn't a war yet. It was a calculation. And we were the variable. Admiral Rice stood. That, more than anything else, signaled the shift. From analysis to action. Then we start preparing now, he said. Quietly. Completely. No assumptions. He looked around the table. We have 6 months. A pause. Then, more quietly. Use them. The meeting dissolved after that. Orders began moving. Systems waking up. Processes initiating that hadn't been touched since the last war. I remained where I was for a moment longer. Watching the projection. Watching the slow convergence of something vast and patient and absolutely certain of itself. 6 months. It didn't feel like time. It felt like distance. And that distance was closing. Preparation began immediately. It also began too late. That was the quiet understanding underneath everything that followed. No one said it out loud, not in briefings, not in reports, but it was there in the margins of every projection, in the hesitation between sentences, in the way people stopped just short of calling anything sufficient. Because sufficiency requires time. And time was the one resource we did not control. The first full military assessment came in 12 days after confirmation. I was present when it was delivered. Not because I needed to be. Because I had started this, and no one had told me to leave. The war room on level 12 was larger than level 9. Designed for coordination at scale. Multiple display walls, layered data feeds, live updates streaming in from every sector of Terran-controlled space. At the center, a single projection dominated the room. 2 formations. Ours. And theirs. Admiral Rice stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the surface as if the physical contact anchored something. Run it again, he said. The simulation reset. The Keth formation appeared first. 600 vessels, arranged not in lines or clusters, but in something closer to a lattice. A shifting geometric structure where each ship occupied a position defined not just by proximity, but by function. Every movement synchronized. Every vector calculated. It didn't look like a fleet. It looked like an equation being solved in real time. Then ours appeared. 138 ships. That was the number we could field immediately. Another 47 under construction. Projected completion, 4 to 5 months. Which meant they wouldn't all be ready in time. The simulation began. No dramatic music. No sudden movement. Just 2 systems moving toward each other in silence. At 3 minutes and 12 seconds simulation time, the Keth formation initiated convergence. The lattice tightened. Reconfigured. What had been a structure became a weapon. At 4 minutes and 1 second, the first Terran ships engaged. At 4 minutes and 19 seconds, the first Terran ships were lost. The display didn't dramatize it. No explosions. Just markers disappearing. One by one. Then faster. At 7 minutes and 43 seconds, our formation broke. At 9 minutes and 10 seconds, the simulation terminated automatically. Outcome, total loss. Time to system collapse, 11 minutes, 26 seconds. No one spoke. Admiral Rice didn't move. Again, he said. The simulation reset. They adjusted variables. Changed approach vectors. Modified engagement timing. Reallocated ship roles. Ran it again. And again. And again. 32 simulations over the next 2 hours. 32 variations. 32 outcomes. All the same. Total loss. The longest survival time, 14 minutes. The shortest, 8. Dr. Alara Voss, Fleet Systems Command, finally broke the silence. We're modeling this wrong. Rice looked at her. Explain. She gestured toward the Keth formation. We're treating it like a fleet. It isn't. It's a coordinated system. Every ship isn't just acting, it's contributing to a larger function. That's what fleets do, one of the generals said. She shook her head. No. Fleets coordinate. This, she paused, searching for the right word. This integrates. That distinction mattered. Coordination allows for delay. For error. For human decision-making. Integration removes that. It creates something closer to a single organism than a collection of parts. I stepped forward slightly. They don't react, I said. They resolve. Several heads turned toward me. I continued. They don't adapt the way we do. They calculate the optimal outcome and execute toward it. If something interferes, they adjust the equation until the interference is removed. Rice nodded once. Which is why every simulation ends the same way. Because in every simulation, we behave the way a system is expected to behave. Structured, predictable, classifiable, and therefore, solvable. One of the civilian strategists leaned forward. Then we increase numbers. A simple solution. Logical. Wrong. With what? Someone else asked. Acceleration of production. Redirect civilian manufacturing. Full war mobilization. Rice didn't dismiss it immediately. He let the idea exist. Examined it. Then, numbers don't solve this. He gestured toward the display. They have 600 fully integrated units. We could double our current projection and still be outmatched in both scale and coordination. Dr. Voss added quietly. And they've done this before. That was the part that carried the most weight. Not the numbers. The history. They've ended 4 species using this doctrine, she continued. Not defeated. Not pushed back. Ended. No survivors. No recovery. No second chance. Just absence. The room absorbed that in silence. Because extinction is not a concept you argue with. It's a conclusion. I looked at the projection again. At the clean efficiency of it. The certainty. There was something almost unsettling about how reasonable it appeared. No chaos. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Just outcome. How did the veil stop them? Someone asked. Dr. Lien answered. They didn't. Not completely. She brought up archived data. Fragmented. Incomplete. But enough to show the outline. They disrupted the formation. Forced them to withdraw before full convergence. But the cost, she let the sentence trail off. We all knew the cost. 412 million, they bought time, I said. Dr. Lien nodded. Yes. That word echoed. Time. Not victory. Not defeat. Time. Admiral Rice straightened slightly. So that's our objective. Not win. Not destroy. Delay. Disrupt. Survive. But even that looked impossible against what we were seeing. One of the younger officers spoke, voice tight. So what are we supposed to do? Send 180 ships against 600 and hope they make a mistake? No one answered immediately. Because hope wasn't a strategy. And mistakes. Mistakes require imperfection. Everything we had seen suggested the Keth didn't make them. I felt the weight of that settle in the room. Heavy. Final. This was the point in most stories where something changes. Where a new idea emerges. Where someone stands up and says there's another way. That hadn't happened yet. This was still the part where reality closed in. Where every path led to the same end. I looked around the room. At the people who were supposed to solve this. Generals. Admirals. Scientists. All of them operating at the highest level of what humanity could produce. And none of it was enough. Not against this. Not against something that had already solved every problem we knew how to present. I looked back at the projection one more time. At the clean geometry of it. The certainty. And for the first time since this began, I understood something clearly. Not emotionally. Not abstractly. Logically. We could not win this by being better. We could not win this by being stronger. We could not win this by playing the game the way it was designed to be played. Because the game already had an answer. And it wasn't us. Admiral Rice broke the silence. Continue modeling, he said. Expand variables. Push outside standard doctrine if you have to. He paused. Then, quieter. Find something we're missing. The room moved again. Not with confidence. With necessity. I stayed where I was a moment longer. Looking at the simulation. At the outcome we couldn't change. And the time we didn't have. 6 months. 6 months to solve a problem that had already ended civilizations. 6 months to become something the equation couldn't account for. Or 6 months to confirm it was right. The first mistake the enemy made wasn't tactical. It was philosophical. They believed war was something you perfected. Humans believed war was something you survived. The simulations began on day 9. Not the standard predictive models, those had already failed. The enemy's behavior didn't follow clean logic trees anymore. Every projection collapsed into uncertainty within minutes. So humans did something else. They stopped trying to predict the enemy. And started breaking the rules of prediction itself. Run it again, Glenn said. The tactical display flickered, hundreds of simulated engagements, branching outcomes, impossible geometries. Ships moved in patterns that contradicted formation doctrine. Commands overlapped. Responses came before triggers. Chaos. Controlled chaos. This isn't war, one Veil observer said quietly. Glenn didn't look at him. No, he replied. It's adaptation. They weren't building a strategy. They were building a behavior. Kate Holloway stood at the center of it all. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in 4 days. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice steady. "Stop thinking of it as a plan," she said. "Plans get killed." She gestured at the simulation. "This survives." The model changed. Instead of command flowing top-down, it spread sideways. A signal here triggered movement there. A decision in one sector echoed across 3 others, not through orders, but through recognition. Pattern awareness. Instinct. Trust. "Humans don't wait for permission," Kate said. "They act." The Veil didn't understand. Their entire civilization was built on coordination, perfect alignment, perfect response, perfect execution. Humans weren't perfect. They were inconsistent. Emotional. Unpredictable. And that made them dangerous. Again, Kate said. The simulation reset. This time, the human fleet didn't hold formation. It almost did. Just enough to be recognized. Just enough to confuse. Enemy response triggered. Countermeasures deployed. But they were reacting to something that wasn't actually happening. Delay, 3.2 seconds. Then 5.6. Then 11. Glenn leaned forward. "They're hesitating." Kate shook her head. "No. They're misreading." That was the moment everything shifted. The enemy didn't lose because they were weaker. They lost because they needed certainty. And humans were building a system that thrived without it. By day 14, the doctrine had a name. Unofficial. Unwritten. Passed through the fleet like a quiet understanding. Almost formation. It couldn't be taught the traditional way. It had to be learned. Through failure. Through repetition. Through trust. Captains trained together, not to follow orders, but to read each other. To anticipate. To move before confirmation. To act on incomplete information and trust that others would do the same. "Verification takes time," Kate said during one briefing. "And time is the one thing we don't have." A young officer raised a concern. "What if we're wrong?" Kate looked at him. "Then we adjust." No hesitation. No apology. That answer spread faster than any official doctrine. Meanwhile, deep in enemy territory, the fracture had already begun. Their coordination network, once flawless, was now compensating. Adjusting. Recalculating. And every recalculation introduced delay. Every delay introduced doubt. Not emotional doubt. Structural doubt. Their system depended on precision. On perfect synchronization. On knowing exactly what was happening. At exactly the right time. Humans had taken that away. The first recorded anomaly came from a mid-tier enemy command node. A simple report. Response misalignment, 0.7 seconds. Insignificant. Ignored. Then another. Countermeasure deployed against non-existent formation. Flagged. But not escalated. Then another. And another. And another. Humans didn't cheer. They watched, hearts pounding, adrenaline blazing. The silence was heavier than any battle noise. The enemy had never experienced it before. No central command. No convergence doctrine. No predictive timeline. They were untethered. And they didn't know what to do. Each of our ships became a node in a network of human unpredictability. Every movement, every shot, every tiny decision communicated across the fleet, not as orders, but as signals. The KET fleet hesitated. Seconds stretched. Then, slowly, they turned. Not toward Earth. Not toward Veil space. Away. Into the void. Admiral Voss whispered. "They're leaving." No one said anything for a moment. Sarah, standing at the secondary console, simply nodded. All 4 hours she had stood there, silent, watching the retreating shape, had prepared her for this. The Veil word Glenn had taught me, written in phonetics, came to mind. A word for grief. For relief. For bearing witness to someone else's sacrifice. I realized it was all of that and more. Earth was behind us, whole and present. The KET fleet had left, not because they were weak. Because humans had rewritten the rules of engagement. Because humans didn't need perfection, they thrived in the gap between certainty and chaos. I looked at the stars. And thought about the lives carried forward because we had acted differently. Because we had trusted each other. Because we had learned to survive together. And somewhere, across space, the 412 million Veil on their homeworld could breathe. Alive. Safe. Because of us. The KET fleet was retreating. Not scattered. Not broken. But defeated in a way they could not comprehend. On the bridge of the reparation, the crew moved in quiet awe. No one celebrated. There was nothing left to celebrate. The cost had been written in ships, in names, in losses that would never be forgotten. Admiral Voss's voice broke the silence. "Prepare for assessment. Report fleet status. We've earned nothing yet." The Terran coalition began the grim accounting. 208 ships remained. 340 KET vessels had turned away, but the scars of engagement were everywhere. Every ship lost was a story. Every captain, every crew member, carried weight. Not just of strategy, but of the lives that depended on them. It hit everyone differently. Relief. Grief. Recognition. A single, simple phrase, carrying 20 years, 900 million lives, and one child standing at a window, watching others pay the cost of a decision made long ago. We were not heroes. Not yet. We were witnesses. Bearers of the weight of someone else's faith, the debt paid forward across generations. Admiral Voss turned to me. You understand what this means? I did. It wasn't just survival. It wasn't just victory. It was a shift in the balance of the galaxy. And in that shift, I realized something crucial. The universe would no longer underestimate humanity. Not because we were perfect. But because we learned to carry more than numbers, more than strategy, more than fear. We carried each other. The KET fleet had retreated into the outer dark, disappearing along vectors calculated to take them far from anything they could harm. The Terran fleet drifted in the quiet aftermath, the silence almost deafening after 11 hours of continuous engagement. On the bridge of the reparation, the crew tried to process what had just happened. Damage reports, casualty manifests, and strategic assessments filled the consoles, but none of it captured the human cost. The 208 remaining Terran ships were battered, scarred, and worn, but alive. We had broken a tactical doctrine that had ended 4 civilizations. We had done it not through perfect coordination, but through improvisation, trust, and an understanding that the sum of human experience could outmatch even the most precise algorithms. Messages from the Veil homeworld began arriving. Each one was a reminder that our actions resonated far beyond our immediate battlefield. The console had written in broken English. We see you now. We see you. Those 7 words carried the weight of generations, sacrifice, and uncounted lives. Back on Earth, the coalition began to rebuild. Orbital construction platforms that had been dormant now hummed with activity. Ships under construction were finished, repaired, and deployed. The Terran fleet's presence in the Sol system was not just survival, it was a statement of humanity's resilience and resolve. I walked the corridors of the reparation, observing the crews in quiet reflection. Some wept. Some stood in stunned silence. All carried names, memories, and the burden of the mission, knowing that the galaxy had just changed because of them. But there was no time to dwell. Admiral Voss spoke quietly over the command line. Prepare for the next steps. We've survived this, but the war is far from over. And I understood, the galaxy now recognized us, and recognition came with a price. Every decision, every maneuver, every sacrifice had led here. The Terran fleet was no longer just a collection of ships, it was a living, breathing embodiment of human tenacity, courage, and ingenuity. And in that moment, I realized that the real battle, the one that would define our place in the galaxy, had only just begun. The Terran fleet returned to Earth orbit, scarred but undefeated. The 340 ships that had engaged 600 KET vessels were now a testament to endurance, strategy, and human unpredictability. Earth itself had changed. Orbital platforms gleamed with activity, automated systems had cleared debris, and fleets had been reinforced while we were in transit. Numbers alone did not guarantee victory, but preparation and adaptability had leveled the playing field. Admiral Voss convened the command staff. Reports were grim but actionable. Casualty lists were long, losses palpable, but the KET had been forced to retreat, their convergence doctrine broken, their central command compromised. The key insight emerged from the battle: human improvisation disrupted absolute precision. Fleets and commanders who trusted their intuition and coordination without waiting for full confirmation had changed the outcome of an engagement that seemed mathematically unwinnable. Back in the quiet of the bridge, I reflected on the larger picture. We were no longer merely survivors, we were now a force capable of reshaping galactic events. Our actions had consequences far beyond the immediate conflict. Messages from the Veil homeworld kept arriving: gratitude, recognition, and validation. Their words, broken in English, yet profound, reminded us that the sacrifices of others had laid the foundation for this moment. We see you now. We see you. It was not just acknowledgement, it was a cultural reckoning, a debt honored across species and generations. Orders were clear: rebuild, reinforce, and prepare for inevitable retaliation. Humanity had survived a near-extinction level engagement, but the war was far from over. Every crew member understood the stakes: the next encounter would demand the same courage and ingenuity. Yet, in that moment of reflection, there was something else, a quiet sense of accomplishment and purpose. We had survived, disrupted, and now stood as proof that one species could challenge a 1,000-year tactical empire. The turning point had been reached. The KET fleet was weakened, their doctrine broken, and humanity now had a tangible place in the galaxy's strategic landscape. I knew then, this was the moment we would tell our children about, the point where the impossible became possible because of trust, improvisation, and the human spirit. The KET fleet had retreated, leaving the Sol system, and Earth itself, intact. For the first time, the weight of survival and victory settled on our shoulders. The 340 Terran ships, battered but alive, were a living testament to adaptability, courage, and relentless determination. The battle had not been clean or easy. Ships were lost. Lives were gone. The names of the fallen were etched into memory, carried forward by those who survived. Each casualty was a reminder of what was at stake, of the price of defiance against a calculated, relentless enemy. Humanity had learned that strategy alone is not enough, it is the combination of intuition, courage, and the willingness to act without full certainty that can turn the tide. Robbie Hale's maneuver, the improvised responses of captains across the fleet, these were the moments that shattered a 1,000-year tactical empire. From the Veil, messages continued to arrive, simple words, heavy with meaning. We see you now. We see you. Those 7 words carried centuries of history, millions of lives, and the silent debt of a species that had once been protected by others who acted without expectation of recognition. We were now part of that legacy. As we looked toward Earth, whole and alive, there was a quiet understanding. The war was not over, but we had changed the rules. Humanity had proven that a small, determined force could disrupt an empire, could defy expectation, and could survive against overwhelming odds. In the aftermath, the focus shifted to rebuilding, learning, and preparing. New doctrines were written, fleets were strengthened, and the story of the battle became both legend and instruction. Future generations would study it, not just as history, but as proof that human ingenuity and spirit matter in ways numbers alone cannot measure. And in the personal moments, the quiet reflection, the moments at the viewport staring into space, there was something deeper, a recognition of debt, sacrifice, and the continuity of life across species. I thought of my mother's words, do not waste it. In that, the mission's meaning crystallized. Every choice, every loss, every victory had been part of a larger story, one that we were now entrusted to carry forward. The universe was vast, the threats immense, but humanity had found its place. We survived, we disrupted, we honored those who came before, and we proved that hope, courage, and conviction are forces no empire can fully calculate. And so, we moved forward, not as conquerors, not as passive survivors, but as a species who had paid its debts, learned its lessons, and was ready for whatever came next. By the time the pattern was undeniable. It was already too late. Back on the human flagship, Kate watched the data stream scroll past. Tiny discrepancies. Micro delays. Errors so small they barely registered. She smiled. Say it, Glenn said. Kate didn't look away from the screen. They're breaking. Not their ships. Not their weapons. Their certainty. And once that was gone, everything else would follow. The fleet moved as one, yet not as one. Not a formation. Not chaos. Something in between, humanity's invention. Robbie Hale, sitting at his console on the Aldersam, stared at the enemy array. 400 vessels, moving like clockwork, except the clock had been jammed. He leaned forward. They do the same thing every time, he said quietly. The comms went silent. Then 6 captains responded, not through orders, but instinct. The maneuver had no name at the start. It didn't matter. It had precision where none should exist. The left flank hit hard. The right center emptied. The rear command group had no cover. 48 seconds. 11 human ships unleashed everything. The KET Supreme Commander's vessel took critical damage. Gone dark. The fleet faltered. And then stopped. Not retreating. Not holding. Simply, frozen. The first reports came in. Robbie Hale had anticipated enemy reactions. The left flank, the right center, the rear command group, all exploited with precision that no algorithm could predict. Human intuition had outmaneuvered a 1,000-year tactical doctrine. Across the fleet, stories of courage, split-second decision-making, and improvisation emerged. Moments that could not be taught, only lived. And then the messages began. From the Veil homeworld, from survivors who had watched the conflict unfold. 7 words. We see you now. We see you.